process, Ann, and I'll go. Very good. Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ron Clough with Manufacturing Works, and today we're going to have the second part of our cyber insurance webinar. On our first session on Tuesday, we spoke a lot about the insurance side of things, and working in tandem with the insurance is, of course, the technology side and the things you need to do so that the combination of those two processes, both your IT, what they do, and your insurance policy, what it covers, are working in tandem. We'll be talking about that. So joining us today to do that will be Diana and Todd. And Diana Meglin is with V2 Technologies, and she'll be leading the part of the conversation today. And Todd Lancaster from the Oswald companies. Diana is an industrial engineer from Purdue, extensive experience in project management and supply chain for manufacturing. And along with her work at V2 Technologies, she is also a volunteer and the advisory committee for Case Western Reserve University. Todd's a graduate of Kent State University, full-time career in risk management strategies, currently with Oswald companies. Along with his duties, he's also a volunteer. He also volunteers not only with Manufacturing Works on our membership committee, but also as a board member for the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Diana and Todd. Thank you.
Diana, do you want to go first?
No, you can go first.
Oh, okay. Last time we talked about kind of as an icebreaker what our first automobile or car was. This time we'd like to kick it off with, what was your first concert? And you can see the handsome face on the screen is Billy Joel, and I think he was inputted there from Diana because that may have been her first concert. So if you want to type in the chat or tell us what your first concert was. Queen, Michael Stanley, nice.
Mine was Paul McCartney at Cleveland Municipal Stadium.
Wow.
Wow,
Very nice.
that had to be good.
It was fantastic.
And I always like how Anne has to put that it was with my little sister.
That's right.
For New Kids on the Block. I think that's good.
Yeah. Bare Naked Ladies. I've seen them before.
I always have to put on there that yes, it is an actual band for those of you that have not heard of them. So that's good. We had a lot of good answers there, and I'm sure there's some good stories that go around those concerts as well. So we appreciate you guys joining us. Yeah, yesterday we did spend on topic number one. A lot of the conversation yesterday was around the insurance. Diana today is going to talk a little bit more about the technology and the readiness and preparedness to better protect your company and also get you ready for the cyber insurance part of it. But at a high level yesterday, we talked about the insurance and what is provided within that policy. And I told you that, we at Oswald are experiencing more than one claim a week. And that was as part of a meeting and conversation I was on today with some other Manufacturing Works committee members. They too, with their clients, are seeing the same as far as one cyber claim, at least one cyber claim a week. So pretty consistent across the board. We discussed the first party and third party coverages that are provided. First party for those coverages provided directly to you as the business owner and policy holder, and the third party coverages in case you were liable for any third party loss, whether it's your employees, customers, clients, or providers. There was a question about social engineering and ransomware, and those are two separate coverages, two separate limits. And what we're seeing nowadays, social engineering is the one where you get the faulty email from the bad person asking you or telling you that they changed their bank routing number, and you send money away to the wrong person. And policies are starting to put a sublimit on that limit of coverage. So instead of the full policy limit of $1 million, there's usually typically 100,000 or 200,000. or ransomware, as of now, most policies will give you that. That's more of the extortion, where they get in your system, they shut it down, and they want you to pay to get the keys back so you can get back to business. And those limits are typically full policy limits. We also talked about the importance of the business interruption coverage too, because it will take you time to get back up and running if you do have an incident. So that was an important aspect of the coverage as well. So today we'll get more into a combination of the work on Diana's side on the technology and preparing and having good cyber hygiene so that you are insurance ready. So Diana, if you want to take it from here on the next slide.
Sure. Okay, thanks everyone, and happy Thursday. We're almost at the end of the week. So yeah, I'm going to be walking through the readiness associated with cyber hygiene. And so it's really, first of all, just cyber hygiene in general, focusing on these 4 areas. So users. User is like the number one concern for as a threat today. Users are clicking on things, taking action on emails, responding to things that are making them an area of focus. Your infrastructure, so your systems, your tools, your that help keep everything safe, that keep everything up to date is critically important for cyber hygiene. Access and access management, who's allowed in and out of your systems and how access is defined is also another area that's important for cyber hygiene. And then, as Todd, I know, talked about this a bit on Tuesday, your third parties, people that you're working with, people that house your systems and your data, are also an area of potential threats. So we're going to talk about hygiene in these 4 areas today. And then at the end of this segment, really just talk about the specifics that we're seeing for insurance readiness. So next slide. All of this, though, I want to mention is all under a cybersecurity framework. So many of you are familiar probably with CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model that the government is for DoD contractors has put in place. We follow the cybersecurity framework, which CMMC levels 1 and 2, but all of that includes the NIST 800-171, those standards related to cybersecurity. So when we talk about hygiene at V2, we're really talking about both of these frameworks in our discussions. So that's what we use to guide us, are these standards. Next slide. So let's talk about users. So as you know, as I mentioned just a second ago, users are the number one concern as far as cyber crime and cyber hygiene. First and foremost, cyber awareness and training are really important. You know, creating a general awareness and training users on a regular basis is a key component to cyber readiness. There's many tools out there. Some can be provided through third parties such as us. Others are provided, some insurance policies actually provide those. So we encourage all of our clients and require that they have good cyber training programs in place to make sure that users know what the trends are and understand the stuff's updated every day. Every day I get an alert that says, here's a new thing that's out there that users need to be aware of. We send regular communication out to our user base at our clients to let them know what like the latest scam is so that they're kind of aware and ready for it. So that's really important. Secondly is testing the users with these simulated attacks. Reporting on these numbers, seeing, which users are maybe heavy, what we call clickers, right? So kind of taking the user base and dividing them into groups. And then you can target training on those clickers and provide remediation for them to, hopefully get them on the right course with regards to how they look at emails, how they manage their communications with vendors and things like that. Thirdly, there needs to be the ability for users to report suspected communication. So a lot of times, what we do with our clients is we implement a phish alert button. So it's integrated in your Outlook. A guy sees a suspect email, he just clicks on phish alert button, that automatically sends an email to IT and they can take a look at it and say, yeah, that's suspect. Maybe we should alert others that it's out there, things like that. So you want to have that ability to report those suspect emails to IT because it does require investigation. There are tools out there that can help IT in that regard too, to help maybe even like swipe those emails out of people's email boxes. And lastly, all of this is around creating that security culture. So if you're having regular meetings with employees, regular communications, you're talking about email security, cybersecurity as part of that to create that culture. I did have a stat that Todd had shared with me around claims. 58% of reported claims were related to phishing. So understand that it's really a high number for that, so which makes users the big target. Next slide. Okay, so we've got a polling question. So we talked about users, they're a high risk group. So what % of users are likely to open a phishing email? So we'll open up the response. Are you good there, Anne? Are we opening up the poll, Anne? Sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. A little delayed there.
I just couldn't find the right one.
Okay, so what % of users are likely to open a phishing email? We have 10, 32, or 45. Submit your answer. Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, 10%, so 10 and 45, so it was either low or high. The answer was actually 32%. So from an initial baseline perspective, 32% of your users would likely open an email. So a company of 100 people, that's 30 people. Through the user training and testing, we can see that drop drastically down to less than 10%. So understand those tools do work. Education and training is really important. So, and I always advertise with users that it's not only in business, but we all have emails for banking and things we're doing on our personal side. So it's also a personal security for you and your family. So it's really important from that regard. So we talked about
real quick on the phishing. I can tell you firsthand, I'll admit I got sucked into one of these a couple of years ago. We talked about it a little bit on Tuesday, but we do internally at Oswald, we do phishing training kind of on a regular basis. And obviously they don't announce it, right? Our IT department sends out emails and faulty emails. And our score, even though we're in the risk and insurance business, we talk about cyber all the time. There's still folks within your office that you need to communicate with on a regular basis, because our score is still around 10 or 15% of people that click on those emails. So you can imagine, being not around insurance or risk or kind of understanding it, that number would be up in that, 30% range. So just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so users wanted to hit that one first because it has been and remains to be the number one concern. Now let's talk about infrastructure. So obviously you have security tools that you need to have in place for your infrastructure. So you think about your antivirus and things like that help keep those known viruses out. In addition to that, there's also advanced threat detection tools that can help more of an artificial intelligence base that can help detect more activity-based, behavior-based activities on a user. Maybe if somebody sees a particular user accessing files unusually at a unique time of day or a large amount of files or things like that, there could be triggers there, and there's tools in place to help protect your infrastructure, which is your servers, your workstations, and all of that that are really important. Secondly is the maintenance piece. So through our clients, we try to upgrade their equipment to get it current, to get it under warranty, because if you have equipment that's old, that's connected to your network, that's just another avenue for the bad actors to get in there and potentially wreak havoc on systems. So, and obviously those don't get those patches regularly. So you need to make sure that equipment is not sitting there old and out of warranty, and that it's updated enough to receive the security patches, and that your IT team is actively managing that equipment and keeping it up on everything that's available. Backups, I know that Todd probably will mention this later in utilizing your insurance, but making sure you have backups that are not just sitting on a shelf, but that you've actually have them to the level to support your business recovery, whether it's, hourly, daily, weekly, and obviously based on your policies for maintaining documentation for your business, making sure that it meets those criteria and that it's accessible for you. And there's on-premise backups, and then there's cloud, off-premise backups. So you need to have a strategy that has data available on-premise and off-premise to support business recovery. And last but not least is the testing of those restoration backups. So making sure that you're going through a process of actually testing the restoration and making sure that if you did have a breach, that you could go back and get that data and that it would be usable. That also kind of goes to like incident response planning and figuring out like, well, how long would it take us to recover should a system go down? So infrastructure is really important when it comes to cyber hygiene. Next slide. Okay, near and dear to my heart is access. So when we, especially when we onboard a new client, we find that one of our first areas of focus is making sure they have sound onboarding and offboarding processes. So making sure we get good people the things that they need when they're starting to be efficient and have a good onboarding experience, but also offboarding, because what we found is a client we recently worked with, when we looked at their access and offboarding, they had about, 60 users were sitting there that still had active accounts that had not been and license or being paid for that had not been offboarded properly. So that's probably a number one concern that keeps business owners up at night, is just not having controls around the permissions and access. So making sure you have good offboarding processes to keep people out of the system. Identity verification, which primarily is consisted of MFA at this point. So multi-factor authentication within applications and systems is critical. So we have it on our banks, we have it on our credit cards at home. Now, most companies are requiring it for Office 365, for other cloud products. So enabling for Zoom accounts, things like that. So enabling your MFA, and MFA can be a few ways. It can be, text driven, where we receive a code, or the preferred way really is the applications with the Google Authenticator, the Duo Mobile, and things of those nature to help keep your codes secure. Small businesses, going to number 3 here. A lot of times, originally we're set up to give everybody local administrative rights. So that allows users to download software that they might see on the internet. And then that potentially could open doors and put risky stuff on your computer. So one of the requirements these days is to remove those local admin rights from your users, because that just is another door for the bad actors to get in. And last but not least, just auditing, just making sure you have a ability to regularly audit the access, who's left the company, are they totally off, things of that nature. We recommend that quarterly for our clients, but an audit is important just to make sure that you have integrity there. And the next slide, the last slide related to cyber hygiene that I wanted to talk about today, is around third party. So we talked about cloud services on Tuesday, and just making sure that you have MFA on those cloud solutions that you have out there, but understanding you want to know how the security is being handled and what the recovery is for data out of that cloud. So just having a cloud solution, on its own is one part, but taking that next step to verify that security and recovery piece is important. The second item here is around vendor agreements and security practices. I was working with a client earlier this year. They had a software that they had put in place in 2012, and they asked me to look at the recovery, like what is the recovery requirement for that software. There was no indication of anything related to ransomware. So this agreement was put in place in 2012, 10 years ago. Look what's changed in 10 years. They really need to go back to that vendor and get a new agreement put in place, because there was nothing listed in there around ransomware, or if the data got breached on their side, what would happen with them. They would be basically left holding the bag on that. So look at those agreements, making sure that they're in place. If they're old agreements, get them updated. It's really important. Vendors limits of liability. We touched on this on Tuesday, just checking those things and looking at where those limits are to know how, if something did happen, where you would have to, your cyber insurance might have to step in. And then lastly, on the third parties is just the data. You know, you've got data, it's in a cloud. It's in a cloud solution. It's in a cloud storage area, but especially for applications that are cloud-based, know who owns the data, such if you decided to shift to another provider, making sure you know where that's at and who owns the data, that you can get the access that you need should something happen. So that's all really around third-party providers. So just to summarize, I know I talked a lot about really exciting cyber hygiene, but if you're talking about the specifics that we get asked and Todd gets asked about, like getting ready for your policy, here are the current nuts and bolts of what's required. Usually it's some sort of security training, verifying that a client has such security training in place, verifying that they have MFA, and MFA needs to be in place in all the right areas. So it could be Office 365. It's obviously all your admin accounts that your IT provider is accessing to manage those systems. Backup, rehearsal, and encryption, making sure you have a rehearsal process to test your backups and that they're encrypted from getting stolen and accessed in other ways. Making sure you have good patching and security protocols on all of your hardware and infrastructure. And lastly, just looking at that local admin access to make sure that it is restricted in a way to support getting your insurance. Okay, that's what I have on hygiene. So I know we're going to talk about utilizing insurance next. I'm going to just turn it over to Todd. Any questions? I guess I'll just stop right here. Any questions at this point?
I did answer. Yeah, I did. Andrew had a question about the MFA, and that is the dual authorization process, where you either through an app or some other way that you have to verify yourself. But and if you could go back one more slide, I just wanted to talk on some of the stuff that Diana just talked about as far as insurance readiness. These are kind of bare minimum stuff that needs to be done. I say that over the last 12 months to 18 months, companies like Diana's and the insurance, we've had to work together to get a lot of this stuff in place in order for our clients to get the cyber insurance. But it's only getting worse, meaning they're requiring a lot more than this. And the more you do, the better your result is from a premium standpoint and coverage standpoint. So just wanted to make that note that it started with MFA, and that's crucial. Backup, patching, a lot of the stuff that's on this slide, but it's just that checklist is going to get longer and longer. Thanks, Ann.
I have a question. You were talking about, Todd, that you realize at Oswald, you guys are still 10 to 15% of people that would open up a phishing email. Does an IT department at a company ever send those out to employees just to kind of monitor their intelligence on that? Like, are there ever ones that you use to be able to validate that number?
Are you meaning those emails that come in? Does our IT company send those out kind of just as a training?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'm referring to. A lot of these are training sent out directly through our IT, internal IT folks, or a third party like a V2 or another software program that can send out these fake emails, these phishing emails, to see who clicks on them. They're just for training purposes. So if you do click on it and you shouldn't have, then you'll get a response from either IT or the third party provider to say, this was a training email, you failed.
Right.
and this is why. So that's where a lot of this is going.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, Marcia, is what we recommend is they do a monthly phishing test on all associates. And then what that does is that creates, you know, kind of puts people in two groups, the good group that passed it, but then the clicker group. And then we target training on those clickers. Then, you know, they get additional training, additional scrutiny, and then they kind of stay on that clicker list for probably a rolling 12 months. Hopefully they'll get better scores and then get off the list. So that's kind of how that's worked for us and how we manage it.
I'm on a lot of lists already, so I don't need to be on another clicker list.
The clicker list.
Yeah.
Another question related to that. You failed that test simply by opening the mail, not responding, just simply opening it causes harm?
Typically, go ahead, Diana.
I was going to say, to actually fail it, you have to click on it. So you open it and it'll show like, okay, so we sent it to 100 people, you know, 50 people opened it, but 32% actually clicked on the link, and that's the failure. So, but it will show that, yeah, they opened it. Now you could, you know, opening is not failure. So that's kind of how it works.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other
Okay.
questions? All right, and you could skip to the next slide, please. So this is a question. Again, this is your name, your company is not going to, you know, be known here, but I just want to get an idea of the folks here of how many do have a cyber insurance policy in place, and if not, the reasons why. And again, this is all random, because we still are seeing companies that aren't buying it. It's not, you know, 100%. But this is helpful in knowing the group. All right, so there are some folks that do not have it, and it's because of the I don't understand, and that's very common. I will talk a little bit about that later, but it's not uncommon because a lot of people look at cyber as, you know, loss of data and information, and they don't have a lot of employees, and they think, you know, I don't have a lot of information on my files, or I don't, you know, keep a lot of my customer information, you know, on the hard drives, or I don't use a lot of credit cards and that sort. So they don't know what the need may be. So that's kind of a common answer. So good to know. Next slide, please. So this, I had this slide on the first day, and I just wanted to highlight it again because this is kind of the all-encompassing what a cyber liability coverage provides. It's not everything, but this is the main things that we see, right? If you do have an incident that, you know, engage legal counsel, for IT forensics, work with ransomware negotiators to pay the cyber extortion if they think it's the best thing. So there's a lot of things that the coverage provides, right? So the utilization, what I would say the utilization of the cyber liability policy is A, for these coverages to make sure that they pay the claims if you do have an incident. And then B, there's resources within the policy as well that we'll talk about in a little bit, but I thought this was an important slide to kind of revisit, go through to talk about utilization of a cyber liability policy, because some people do that don't buy the policy, think that they just don't understand what it covers and what it would reimburse me for, or how it could come in play. So this I thought was an important one, that it does almost 90, I would say 99% of the time when we have a cyber incident for somebody that has coverage, there is a payment paid out. Next slide, please.
Hey, Todd, before we get into the policy, there was a question in the chat about specifically about a policy. I don't know if you wanted to read that really quick.
No, Andrew, good question. And we do see this a lot where a lot of just regular either property or liability or package policies, we call them in the insurance business, will have a cyber coverage thrown in within there. I can name a couple insurance companies. Cincinnati Insurance does it, and Westfield Insurance. Sometimes the more regional ones do. But that you're right, the limits are low, where they might have a $25,000 or $50,000 coverage for certain things. That would not be what we would consider a standalone or a full policy. At least you have something, and that's good, because we've had situations where that has been used or utilized, but it hasn't been full recovery for the incidents. We talked about some of the claim amounts and how they quickly go over $100,000 upwards to over $1 million sometimes, depending on the loss. So good question, Andrew, but it's not uncommon. But if I was your risk advisor, an insurance advisor, we would talk about, what a full policy would look like, what the differences are. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, so as I said, there's some risk management services provided by most cyber insurance policies. I will not say all, but most. We've talked about access to a breach coach. So before you have an incident, if you buy a cyber policy with most carriers, you have access to reach out to this person to go through your IT security right now, talk about what would happen if you did have an incident, kind of just strategize about what a plan, recovery plan might look like. There's a lot of online training that's accessed through these policies, which Diana talked about already, and we've discussed as far as the phishing training and things of that sort. So those are included in there. eRisk Hub, which has a ton of information for policyholders to help kind of, if you don't have any internal policies in place about, internet use at work or things of that sort, it can help you with those things. It can help start an incident response plan, kind of an outline and good educational content. And some of them will provide password management software, either at a discount or free. And then, as we've talked about, the phishing testing could be at a discounted rate to policyholders. If you can imagine, if you have coverage through one of these insurance carriers, they're now on the hook for the dollar amount. So they want to provide you with resources to make you better, smarter, safer when it comes to cyber risk. And there is one more question I want to hit before we go on. If you don't have a cybersecurity policy, would a loss be covered under fraud insurance? Good question. Sometimes there is an overlap between what we call a crime policy, if you have a separate crime policy, or sometimes similar to the cyber, there's a small sublimit of crime coverage in there. So if it's a dollar amount, if it's an actual loss of funds or money, then there could be some coverage in crime, but we'd have to analyze what your policy states and whether or not that would trigger the coverage through the crime. So there could be, but unfortunately, I don't know without looking at the exact wording of the policy and the exclusions and whatnot. So what's driving this cyber insurance market shift? We've talked about the ransomware and extortion epidemic. Those are very, very, frequency was going up tremendously in 2020 and 2021. It's starting to level off and almost go down. I think a lot of it is because of what underwriters are requiring for the insurance policy, but that's obviously driven the cyber market pricing to be up, and a lot more underwriting that is tougher. So the supply chain is a big issue too. And what we mean necessarily by supply chain is, if you can imagine a contract manufacturer gets hit with a breach and they're down for an extended period of time, and they're supplying their product to a number of different folks, that's a huge issue from a supply chain standpoint. So those companies might be coming back to you as the supplier of saying, hey, because of your loss, we've had a financial loss as well. So that's where that third party business interruption could come in play. So that's another concern that's underwriters have. And the social engineering claims, which we talked about, that's more of the faulty email that comes in, and you pay either, a vendor or somebody that you think is the correct person, correct account, but it's actually going to the bad actors. So those have become increasingly, they happen more often. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about this as well as far as underwriting changes. So co-insurance is up to 50%. What that means typically is that you will share in the loss. Instead of the insurance company saying, okay, you've given us a policy. If you have a loss, we'll pay 100% of what the loss is up to the policy limit. They're putting in co-insurance saying, okay, if you have a $100,000 loss, we'll pay for half of it, or we'll pay for 75% of it, depending on the way the policy is written. So got to look out for that. Rate increases from 60 to 100%. Typically, cyber is rated off of sales and employee count. So as your sales increase, or that's how they're rated. But that rate per 1,000 of revenue or per number of employees has been going up 60 to 100%. So imagine somebody used to be paying, $5,000, $2,500 for a policy. Now that's almost doubled, and we see that continuing to go up. Now, if we see a renewal at less than 10%, we're happy. A lot more exclusions, end of life technology, which Diana kind of hit on. When you have old hardware and old technology that you're using, they're going to say, we exclude anything that happens with those devices, and they usually put a limit of what old or end of life technology is. And sublimiting cyber extortion, sublimiting the social engineering, which we've talked about, limiting the dependent business interruption loss, and then obviously the rigorous underwriting process. It's what we used to be able to just, hey, fill out this application. We can turn around and get a quote in a week. That is not going to happen. So you got to spend a lot of time going through the underwriting process now. So let's talk about a claim scenario that we at Oswald dealt with. Manufacturer was the victim of a ransomware attack, took down 4 of their servers. They couldn't do anything. No email. They couldn't access their system. They couldn't do any basic operations. So critical data and documents were rendered inaccessible. Next slide, please. Fortunately, they had a cyber policy in place, which provided them access to the breach coach, which again, you can talk to them beforehand, but now, they're at the phase where they had a breach coach for an actual incident. And that is helpful because it coordinates everything, coordinates legal, IT, computer forensics, gets everybody on the same page, try to mitigate the problem as much as possible. Because without that, like I asked at the very beginning of this, if you went in and you had this situation happen and you did not have a plan, you did not have an insurance policy in place, what would you do? So this is helpful to mitigate this claim. Now, the next slide, I'll show you that even though it's a large number, this was a larger manufacturer, but as I've said, just imagine if this was half of this cost for you as a business owner, or a third of that cost. That's still a big number. So the brick devices, a lot of their hardware was rendered useless. So that was $150,000. The biggest portion of it you can see is the extortion from the ransomware payment and the business interruption. So this client was down for 14 days, had a business loss of $200,000, and the extortion payment, that alone was about $1 million. And luckily they did have over $1 million worth of coverage. So, they were able to fully recover. A lot of gray hairs and a lot of time and effort and struggle, but they were able to replace a lot of these costs through the insurance policy. And I could go through a number of incidents and situations that we've dealt with. And it happens. I mean, it happens to everybody. It happens to small, it happens to large. Like I said, we're on pace for more than one claim a week this year, and that's down from last year, but it's still quite a lot.
So Todd, quick question. On the brick devices, do the folks that breach the system, do they purposely damage, like through software, tools and that, the hardware, or is it just incidental to the whole thing that that happens?
That's a good question, and maybe Diana can answer that. I don't think they're purposely doing it. I think, the purpose of them, the main purpose of this incident, right, is to get the extortion or ransomware payment. That's typically what they're doing, but a lot of the times, whether it's end of life technology or it's such a bad, I'm drawing a blank on the word, virus or whatever it may be, that hardware is just no longer usable. Diana, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, no, I would say it's probably that it was older stuff that just couldn't be recovered and just became, useless at that point, end of life, or other factors that led to the equipment having to be replaced.
And
Okay.
and another thing that I'll say, that's I don't want to say it's not common. Of all the things that the policy pays for, that is probably down on the list of things that we utilize it for, but it does happen. And like I said, it's not going to be recovered under a property policy because it's a cyber incident.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there was a question on a rand check. Why is it that they cannot get back up and running quickly via backups on the server? So if the servers, I guess to explain that a little bit, normally with a backup strategy, you'd have backups on site and then off site. So on site backups, easily recoverable, off site backups, cloud solutions, something of that nature. So and it could be that depending on what your backup strategy was, it just took a while to get the data back from the source. So offsite backups typically take longer than onsite backups, and depending on if that onsite backup, we recommend that it's not connected to your network, so that it's on, but it's limited connectivity to eliminate the need for or potential for harm. So it really just could be that maybe they only had an offsite backup, and that takes longer to recover from.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say to that is these guys, gals, whoever's doing the bad actors, they're smart and they're good. So when they get into the system, they know, how could I harm them the most so that I can get payment or get them to do what I want them to do. So they'll, I'm not an IT person, but they're smart enough to kind of know ways to make it difficult.
Right. And when we work with our clients, when we talk about recovery of your backups, we use two metrics. So it's a recovery point objective and a recovery time objective. So recovery point objective is, if I have an outage today, I want to be able to recover back to a certain point. So back to last night at midnight. So that's my recovery point. So we establish that with the client, like when you have an issue, where do you want to back up? What point do you want to back up? And how long do you want to take to recover, the recovery time? So I want to recover back to midnight of yesterday, and I want to do that within 8 hours. So we use those two metrics to then drive the design of the backup strategy. Those are critical metrics that a client needs to identify. So can you afford to be down for 8 hours? That's 1 day's worth of revenue potentially. So it's important to understand the business and how what those metrics need to be for us to plan appropriately.
And to add on to that, from an insurance perspective, we all know what deductibles are from property or auto on your car insurance and stuff. For cyber, the deductible is time. So early on, you used to have a deductible of, we could get it as low as 4 hours or 8 hours. Now it's getting upwards to 24 hours or 48 hours, meaning if you have an incident, but you recover and you get everything back up and running within 24 hours or 48 hours, then the coverage isn't triggered and there's no loss from a cyber insurance perspective. But if the loss goes longer than that time on your policy, the deductible, which is the time, then you can, that's when you would start to recover from an insurance standpoint.
Okay, hopefully that answers Andrew's question. Okay, so in summary, maybe let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk about the timeline. So as Todd mentioned, especially with the underwriting guidelines and some of the scrutiny, you need to make sure you're allowing enough time to prepare for your renewal of cyber insurance. Hygiene needs to happen throughout the whole year. If you're doing your right hygiene, and there's always updates and new things that are coming about. But if you're taking steps in good cyber hygiene, like we talked about, then the renewal process probably wouldn't be as painful. But I know that a lot of our clients are getting their renewal assessment checklist and application up to 6 months ahead of the renewal. And then they get with their IT provider to then figure out what else they need to have in place. So because it takes, I would say, at least 60 days to get MFA in place, especially when it impacts a lot of users at your business. So understand you do need probably a good 2 to 3 months to implement things with users to then hit that renewal. Or Todd, do you want to add some more there?
No, I mean, that's right on. If you do a lot of the cyber hygiene on a regular basis, you're doing the training and you've kind of been up to speed, then that timeline can be shrunk. We just want to make sure that we're not, running up against the deadline. We see a lot of companies that we've, began working with that we didn't work with in the past. We would send out renewal information for the cyber specifically 6 months in advance. And they're like, wait a minute, the renewal's not for a while, and I said, well, you'd be surprised at how many questions they're going to ask. And it might be a lot different than what you answered in the past. So it's critical to get started ahead of time. And I always look at this from my lens, from an insurance and risk perspective. Really what this is doing with the cyber hygiene and what Diana and her team do is helpful for your business to get back up and running, to be safe, secure. So hopefully nothing happens. And then when it does, you can recover quicker. From an insurance standpoint, your premiums will be lower. And you'll be in a better position from that standpoint to have multiple carriers looking at your business instead of if you're kind of a C or a B on the scale, you might only be able to get 1 or 2 carriers to quote, and then you're not in a position of power.
Yeah, those are good points. And then just to add to that, it's a time factor to prepare, but I do want to mention it could be additional costs. So for example, if you don't have MFA on, say, your VPN, for example, you have users that work remote and they VPN to systems and on-site servers and things like that, there are additional costs associated with licensing to get that MFA enabled VPN. So there's costs associated with that. And then there's also user time with suddenly, you've got, we just did it, we've done it with several clients, but 80 users that have to download an application on their phone and then set up a password, enable everything, go through the steps, and then, obviously then get it set up and all of that. So there's time for all the users and then additional maybe licensing costs that companies may not be thinking about when it comes to some of these additional security requirements. Okay, so the summary. So we talked about the understanding part, hit those 4 areas. I think Todd did a great job on that. We talked about the readiness and the 4 areas, and then the utilization as it comes with regards to the components of when you utilize your policy, all the things you want to include there. So Todd, do you have anything else you want to add there?
No, not much. I think we've talked a lot about I focused a lot yesterday and a little bit today on the coverages, the insurance coverages. The key component is, Diana, and what the IT folks do to protect it from happening, and again to make it easier to recover. If you're not prepared to just disregard the insurance aspect of it. If you're not prepared from a cyber and IT perspective, it can cripple your business. So you just want to make sure that you're ready. You're training your employees. They're aware of what to look for, and you avoid those bad things. If you have a bad thing happen and you have an insurance policy and you have a good one, then you would definitely be able to recover a lot of that loss. So what's next? I think we talked a lot about it as far as what's driving it. It's only going to get tighter from underwriting perspective. One thing I will say, there are newer insurance companies, more insurtech companies, what we call them, like a lot of data-based AI, using a lot of AI and different things to understand the risk and understand their customers and clients to get in the space. So we're having a little bit of success with those new carriers, but they're asking the same questions and they want to know. They just might have a little bit more data and information around it to help the insurance you as the business owner. We talked about the higher deductibles. Less capacity means, maybe you're at $1 million right now and you want to buy 2 million because you know what the risk is, and some insurance companies aren't willing to write more than 1 million right now. So you might have to find it either a different market or get 2 separate carriers to layer that program. Lower sublimits on specific breach types. And then the last few Diana can talk about as far as testing and.
Yeah, so backup. So it's one thing to have them, but just to test and verify that they work and that they're recoverable. Some insurance requirements are saying that you have to prove to me that it can be restored. And then the last one is just we're getting requests for like almost going through like we call it a tabletop exercise where you're actually like simulating a response and going through the process of the response happens. Here are all the characters in it. It's almost like a full-blown exercise. And then there's always the lessons learned from that and then the adjusting for the next time. So some industries and some insurance providers are requesting that you actually provide an IRP, we call it, and then do a regular exercise of testing it.
Yeah, and that's to Diana's point, they're going to start asking that from an insurance perspective. So, and I think it's a great exercise. I mean, we do a lot of that with, fires and floods and different things from a risk perspective, right? I mean, you put a plan in place of what do you do in case this happens, and you got to have that now for the cyber as well.
I think we're almost out of time, guys. So just real quick, our contact information, I don't know if we want to go back just real quick. We would, be able to do an assessment if anybody needed help with anything, be able to kind of review hygiene practices, provide some update on vulnerabilities and go through an assessment there. We'd be happy to help any of the folks here, other Manufacturing Works members on this.
Yeah, and from an insurance standpoint, we have offered Manufacturing Works members, anybody that watched this presentation, and we do it a lot, free review of your cyber insurance. All policies are different, the structures are different, the deductibles and that kind of stuff. So we want to make sure that you're at least aware of the position you're in, and talk about how we can improve it.
Very good. Yeah, well, thank you very much. I know we are marching up against the 1 o'clock time frame, but very good information. Thank you. I always like it when we have folks in the chat box say that they'll reach out and follow up. That is, a big part of what we try to do is make sure people know that there are ways to mitigate risks is the main thing we do. Mitigate risk. It's a lot less expensive than the cost of dealing with an event, whatever that is in your business. So thank you, Diana and Todd. Excellent presentation. Folks, if you ever have other ideas, things you'd like us to present, shoot us an email, let us know. We will be posting this in a couple of days up on our YouTube channel, which you can get through from our website. And thank you all very much. Be well, stay healthy. Take care.